With new McValue at McDonald's, you get more than you expect for breakfast. Like buy a sausage burrito and add a sausage McMuffin for $1. Get more than you expect with new McValue at McDonald's.
Prices and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
With a $5 meal deal with new McValue. You pick a McDouble or a McChicken, then get a small fry, a small drink, and a 4-piece McNuggets. That's a lot of McDonald's for not a lot of money.
Prices and participation may vary. McDouble meal $6 in some markets for a limited time only.
When you are the Secretary of Defense and you are leading the United States military, probably should be a little bit more careful than your average person who knows how to do this. We had a Republican congressman call him out, and finally it seems to be a little bit of pushback and breaking ranks, saying that it's just amateur, that what Hegseth is doing is totally amateur.
Amateur hour. The whole thing is amateur hour.
I have a couple of things I wanted to check in with you about. Some of them in the foreign policy space and bucket with, Pete Hegseth. That saga continues. And also, we're going on this weird colonial bent now in U.S. diplomacy. So I wanted to talk to you about that. What do you got?
There's a lot going on. I mean, look, we just lost the Pope this week. That's a very big deal. He was a very big religious figure, but also a state figure, a moral figure. We are also watching some real reaction to the attack on DEI that's happening in some of the big companies. And so we're seeing people organize themselves to push back on that. And then, the markets. I know people have varying degrees of understanding or paying attention to what happens in the stock market, but a lot of people have 401ks and, those haven't had a great week, great month.
Why don't we start with, why don't you take it away? Because I'm curious about what you mean by pushing back against DEI, right? Because it just seems like so many organizations are deleting the word diversity from their websites, from their strategic plans. Are they actually not doing diversity work? But remember, Target was one of the first out of the gate saying, we're eliminating all DEI. And then it actually seems to have filtered out to they are not carrying Black brands anymore, Black owned brands. Those are disappearing from the shelves. So that's an actual business consequence. But then Costco on the other side is yep, we embrace diversity because that's our workforce. Thank you very much. So where are we at now?
There was this moment right after George Floyd in 2020 when we were all, home, remember, during the pandemic, where, all these companies pointed up and they said, hey, you're right. We haven't done what we need to do to eliminate some of these racial disparities that exist in the country. So here's what we're going to do. And people released their numbers and talked about where they were in terms of leadership and overall hiring with people of color. They also began looking for brands to bring into their companies. They began looking for leadership people to hire. You saw a lot of theaters and arts organizations and foundations and you just name it. People were trying to recruit good qualified talent and creating these sort of DEI executives who are supposed to be monitoring this. And so what we've seen over the course of the last year as the ascendance of Trump has come back is people are getting rid of all that. It was I don't want to just say it was fad and fashion, but I will say it was something people did in a moment of time, I think, just to kind of mollify and deal with the public where we were during that summer. And so one thing that's impressive to me is I believe for a long time, people of color have been through a lot worse than Donald Trump. Although it's amazing how similar Donald Trump is to the worst that people have had to endure. This history does rhyme, right? We think about Native Americans and what they had to go through being relocated around the country and trooped around like they weren't human beings. You think about, what happened in the Southwest of the United States when the United States basically took over whole sections of the Southwest and began dealing with, people who were Mexican Americans, or then Mexicans, and they became Mexican Americans, and how they dealt with them, and African Americans and slaves and segregation. And so anyway, what all of this kind of came to a head for me this week is my friend, Pastor Jamal Bryant from New Birth Baptist Church in Atlanta, in Decatur, Georgia. He organized a bunch of churches around the country to create what they call the Bullseye Black Market. And so they have been bringing in Black brands into the churches to be able to have markets for people to come and buy from those brands in the churches. This is directly a reflection of the way African Americans organized themselves during Jim Crow segregation, where they couldn't go into white stores. They couldn't participate in kind of larger white economics. So they created their own spaces. They created their own hotel, their own shops, their own restaurants. They brought people together to sell to each other. And that, it appears, we are going back to the historical record in our DNA to try to create these alternative markets and spaces for people to take care of themselves while they're under assault from the broader society.
And it is that grassroots organizing element of it. And yes, Target is pretty much everywhere. And it was great to have an elevation and an awareness of what Black beauty brands were, or Black owned food brands, and have that be visible as opposed to invisible, which is what we have now. But the idea there of a boycott of Target seems to have worked for a lot of people. I mean, they've stopped their shopping at Target. Target's foot traffic has dropped. Target has had challenges in their earnings, and again, contrast that with the companies that just kind of stayed with their mission and what they'd already committed to. They're not hurting in the same way. I find it fascinating, though, that the replacing that market that was available potentially with the Target or these other big corporate brands like Walmart, and getting back to the basics of, well, this is community driven. And that's ultimately what this idea of a market was when it began. And even the term markets comes from the physical space where you gather to trade goods and commerce. So the translation then to the bigger markets, which I know can get complicated, but the reality is that we have largely had the monetary market be independent of political governance. And that's why you have the Fed and all of the money that exists out there in the system. And they are always conservative about making any tweaks and changes to interest rates, because you make a tiny little change in an interest rate and it has a downstream effect on whether or not people are saving money or whether they're buying, whether homes are affordable or not, and whether, again, your 401k. So how concerned are you about the fact that now Trump is insulting the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board and says that he needs to go?
Yeah, here's where it matters. I'm very concerned because there's two things. One, obviously, the American economy is the reserve economy for the country. So many people come here, look to the United States as a stabilizing force across the planet for monetary policy. Now, that may not matter every day as you're getting your kids to school and, just trying to get your gas tank filled. But it does matter in terms of the stability of the economy. But when the president begins to exert control over the Federal Reserve, it means you can't trust what's happening in the economy, and that is destabilizing to the entire international economic system. So obviously we're concerned about what happens in global markets and the stability. But again, as you said, Nayyera, it's about whether or not we're going to have interest rates that for your home loan or for your car loan or for credit card loans that begin to go up. And what happens when people lose confidence in the Federal Reserve and its independence is that means they'll charge America more money. So if we want to go out and borrow money, it's going to cost more because we become riskier, which means your car loan goes up, your house loan goes up, your credit card loan goes up.
Yeah, and it ties to this broader piece of the puzzle with how the erratic nature of how Trump has been dealing with economic policy, whether it's tariffs, one day they're on, one day they're off, one day they're everybody, then it's just somebody, and maybe we're negotiating, maybe we're not. And then threatening and challenging the Federal Reserve. Like it's inserting an element of chaos into the economy. And the challenge we have with that, despite many folks' desire for revolution, and some people love chaos, they think it's great, is yes, when things are unpredictable economically, people make decisions that exclude you, and those people include China and the United Kingdom and most of our allies, who are not interested in necessarily negotiating or renegotiating with the United States. And in fact, China is simply saying that you are heavily dependent on our goods and you don't need to get cheap goods from us then. Like, that's fine. Enjoy your increased prices. The second thing they're saying is, okay, we had US Treasury bonds, which we held on to them. We bought them. That gave you, the United States, money when you needed it. We're going to sell those. And when countries start to sell millions upon millions of dollars worth of treasury bonds, which is supposed to be like the safest, most stable investment, that's when the country's credit and the country's ability to make changes starts to shift up and down. So China knows how to play this game of the long game. They know how to play the game of showing off that they're the ones who are stable. They're the ones who have common sense economic policy. And now the United States, we're the erratic ones. And who's going to feel the impact of this? It's not just this, hypothetical thing between, the White House and China. This ends up impacting how we operate in our daily marketplace, right? Like I don't see the price of eggs having changed. I'm tired of hearing about eggs, but it is literally the thing that Trump said that he would do, is that he would immediately day one fix prices. And that hasn't happened. In fact, they've removed inspections of avian flu from poultry farms. Like they're making it,
thank you for going there,
more expensive and less safe. So literally all the stuff that we use in this country, pieces of equipment, pieces of toys that come from elsewhere are not going to come from elsewhere anymore. If they do, they're going to be more expensive and they're going to be more unsafe. Like, how is this beneficial to anybody who is not the bajillionaire?
Yeah, it's horrible. I just bought a chicken yesterday. I was thinking about this because I bought a chicken yesterday, and I was
live
like,
chicken,
I've never
or
paid
like
this
pieces
much
of chicken? Like, do you guys have a pet
I probably
chicken?
should buy a live chicken so I can put it in the backyard and save money on eggs.
Mm-hmm.
But then I guess I need a rooster.
Mine too. It's usually the.
But that's
okay, I'm not
that's a whole biological conversation we're not ready to have.
Yeah.
But to have a chicken, that was more expensive just because of the bird flu, right? And I just saw this woman who I think was on 60 Minutes talking about how if the bird flu gets out of hand, it will make COVID look like a walk in the park.
Yes.
Right. And meanwhile, we're cutting monitors and inspectors and all the health agents that keep all this stuff from happening. It just
and we already know that bird flu has transferred. It has transferred into other animals.
Right.
It is transferring.
And humans have had it, but it hasn't gone human to human, right?
Yes.
So it's gone animal to human, but not human to human. And when it starts going human to human, everybody buckle in, because that's when shit gets funky. So we gotta really be careful.
But
about
also,
this. But they're not being careful, and that ties back to the place where you started.
Well, you said when it happens. That's some of what many of the things we are talking about right now. It's not if, it is when, because it is 1 + 1 = 2. Whatever crazy math Trump is using to understand economy and tariffs and all that, we know 1 + 1 = 2. When a disease has started transmitting from animals to people, it is just a matter of time before it goes people to people. It is just a matter of time before all of this chaos and erratic decision-making has people pulling out of markets, pulling out of investing, holding on to their savings and their cash. And again, we're already seeing countries pulling out of that. So it's when. That's a key part of what you said, not if.
Absolutely. And I think we just have to be really cautious, because these people are not careful. They're not doing anything well. And this is kind of taking us back to where you started, which is saying what happens with the Secretary of Defense, who is once again chit-chatting with his friends on the apps about what's going on in the wars and battles the country's trying to fight.
Yeah, let's recap.
Good.
Let's recap on Hegseth.
Yes.
He
tell us about it, ma'am.
Yeah, so he was a Fox News host on the weekends, not even a primetime host, who happened to be friends with Trump, and despite all of these other issues and allegations, gets confirmed by the Senate. Sure, he had done his own personal service, but is by no means a 4-star or experienced officer or general in that way. And he then proceeds to bring his wife into meetings with foreign leaders. He tries to cozy up to Musk and have Elon Musk, who has interests in China, business interests, get a potential meeting on the war plans with China, which, by the way, only got canceled because Trump was like, wait a minute, I'm seeing this in the newspaper. Why is my business guy getting information on war? Like, even Trump was shocked at this, and he kiboshed it. That's how crazy that is.
When Donald Trump is the voice of reason.
Yes. So the meeting luckily didn't happen, because that's, again, bonkers. And then we find out, right, that the strike that happens on the Houthis, which is part of a broader challenge that we're having with in the Middle East, that it's being shared on an insecure app. And then it's not just the chats that we know about. There's other Signal chats where he is sharing actual details of operations that generals had given to him under secure information. So secure information is now being put. And who else? His brother's on that chat.
I think,
like, this is like his family. He's like bringing his family to show up for, hey, look how cool my job is, guys.
Yeah. I think they call it, the intelligence people call it a spill. right? When you basically expose confidential and classified information to a public channel in some way, that's called an intelligence spill. Is, one's a leak, but it's at least a spill, which people now it's out there. And I will tell you, they're very particular about devices when you're in the government. You know this. You've been there. I mean, what happens to your devices, having what they call positive control of your devices. You're supposed to always have them, and that is without exposing a lot of things, but that is something that everybody needs to be very careful of when they have these kind of designations. And so to just be chit-chatting with your buddies on the apps and trying to show off how cool you are,
That's the
we're
problem.
about to strike the Houthis.
No one's saying don't talk to your brother.
What, bro?
There's just no need for your brother and your wife to be involved in discussions about generals and military attacks and foreign leaders. Like, that is not, most of us know how to keep our personal life and our job separate. But when you are the Secretary of Defense and you are leading the United States military, probably should be a little bit more careful than your average person who knows how to do this. We had a Republican congressman call him out, and finally it seems to be a little bit of pushback and breaking ranks, saying that it's just amateur, that what Hegseth is doing is totally amateur.
Amateur hour. The whole thing is amateur hour. I mean, look, now the brother does have a job at Homeland Security, so he probably has a security clearance. But there is the thing that you all know, which is you both need to have a clearance and you need to have a need to know the information, right? There's no reason for Homeland Security officials to have information about battle plans that are happening in the Middle East, and certainly not his wife, who is not a government employee. What is going on here, people? So I think Donald Trump, if he really does care about the military, he's going to have to figure this out, because this is just one case of many, because we've seen this with Doge all over the place, whether it's Social Security, IRS, FAA, with the, whether or not we've got enough people tracking the airplanes, whether it's the bird flu people, whether it's, everywhere we look, measles outbreaks, that are happening in Texas. Everywhere we look, what we see is amateur hour and a bunch of people using their Fox News chit chat skills to try to run the government. And it's going to cause a real problem.
That's what it is, right? It is the chit chat skill that made you fun and interesting on television. You can't directly translate that to handling the nation's national security. I'm glad
they're saying Trump likes Hegseth because he looks good on TV. That's basically his argument for keeping him. I like the way he.
Right, but then the longer he keeps him, the more trouble he's going to be creating, because clearly he's somebody who doesn't understand the basics of the job. Like, you and I know we used to walk into certain buildings and there's little boxes. You put your phone in, you close it, and then you go into a secure room and you get your phone when you come out. And the idea that you would actually be chatting with people about what happened in that meeting just for fun. It's just, take it seriously, just a little bit. Just ask him to take a little bit. He also ended up firing most of his leadership in the front office, fired his chief of staff, his deputy chief of staff, his senior advisor. So instead of taking responsibility and mending his ways, Hegseth is lying to the public and firing the people around him who probably were telling him this is a bad idea.
Yeah. And then now it looks like he wants to get, like an FBI investigation into where leakers are inside the Department of Defense.
Because the problem is that people know, right? That's Hegseth is saying the problem is that people know that this happened, not the fact that he's making all of these mistakes. That's the deflection.
Yeah, it's just really crazy. And this ties to what we talked about a while back about what's happened with USAID and with all the ways that American foreign policy has been crippled under the administration. Because one of the things that buys Americans goodwill is the fact that we go out and we basically buy goodwill, right?
Yes,
we basically
literally.
go around the world and literally we give away food, we give away money, we give away personnel, experienced personnel, Army Corps of Engineers, whatever it is. They go in, they help solve problems for discrete populations of people, big flags of the United States all over the place, brought to you by the people of the United States. And people say, oh, these Americans, they're not such bad lads and chaps after all. We think we might like these people. And then all of a sudden we just evaporate and we pull out of all these places where we're supposed to be doing all this good work, including, one of them is PEPFAR, right, in Africa. And, you've been paying a lot of attention to what goes on in the State Department and particularly how they interact in the developing world. I mean, tell me, like, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so
am I wrong to be this freaked out? Am I
Jamal,
overreacting here?
I think it's worse than what you've already talked about, which was bad enough, right? The idea that we started off this new administration with the United States saying no more money for any soft power projects for starving people, for kids, for vaccines, and now they've now decided that they're going to effectively eliminate U.S. diplomatic presence in Africa. I'm not talking the Middle East, the North, but like sub-Saharan Africa. They've decided, they being the Trump administration and Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, that we don't need any diplomatic presence or embassies below Sahara, right, desert. So like anything in what we know as the African part of the continent, and that the only thing that we need there is the ability to extract critical minerals and to do counterterrorism operations. What I hear as a former diplomat when I read that this is the plan is we are treating the people of the Black people of Africa as people who should work so that we can get their diamonds, their lithium, all of their, gold, whatever else we used to get from the colonial era, that we should arm and work with some of the bad guys or good guys or whoever to make sure that there is, the bad guys are kept in check. But even if we end up keeping them in check, there's no actual diplomacy that we're going to do to really solve the problem. We're just going to keep arming people, maybe sending special operations. So we're going to do the war piece and the extraction of resources piece, and zero investment in people, in growth, in anything that actually could lift Africa up and also, again, lift up our global economy and the United States. Like that, it is a colonial era plan that they are going to institute. And who do you think is going to fill that vacuum? China and Russia. They are more than happy to buy people off as well. They've been doing it for years. So how does this help American competition? It doesn't. It actually makes it far worse for the global economic picture when the United States is not, engaged in these spaces. We're certainly not going to be able to say that the United States believes in human rights or anything when literally there's wars there and people starving. And our solution is, we just want to make sure we get our piece of your resources, which is the same conversation that Trump is effectively having with Ukraine.
I was thinking that exact thing, right? Like, this is how they're doing business. It's very mercantile, right? It's like, okay, we got the biggest army, we got the baddest weapons. Tell you what, we'll cut you a trade. You give us some money, we'll give you some army. Like, we're turning our armed forces into mercenaries, right? So we're going to trade armed forces protection to go in and, get access to oil, access to rare earth minerals, as Trump calls them, rare earths. We got to go in and do that. But we're basically going to license out the American military. And so we even lose, some people would argue that the American foreign policy has never really been that benevolent. It's always been about, expansionism and pursuit of economic expansion. But we're even going to lose the sheen of it, right? Like, we had this cloth over us that we were, shrouded in some sort of benevolence that we wanted the world to be a better place. And I will tell you, this is not something that people people get the joke about the United States. When you travel around the world, people will say to you, listen, the one thing about the United States is it's not that Americans don't want to make money. It's not that Americans aren't trying to get what they want, but Americans are okay if everybody else makes money too. Right. Yes. So unlike China or one of these countries where they go in and they just want all the resources, they want all the money, they want every control of everything. When the United States comes in, we really do create a market. Okay, we might want our cut. Everybody wants their taste. But if you want something, you can get it too. And I think people appreciate that there is some amount of inclusion in the American expansion, and not just one where the Americans take all the valuable things and leave all the remnants to the people in the country where they were.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's an aspect of this that the folks who are always down in America overseas are like, oh, look, Americans are hypocrites. They talk about human rights, but they start wars. And we'd say, well, but look, we have these programs where we're distributing vaccines, all of the research that we're sharing globally. There are children who are healthy and getting food because of American donations. Okay, I guess then we're proving those people right, that America really doesn't care about any of those good things, that it really is just about the United States getting ahead. And the challenge is we're not going to unwind this globalized economy we're not. And they're still trying to turn it back to, again, like this, you said mercantile economy, I like Smoot-Hawley tariffs, like all these things from the 1800s. That's their vision of, America and the world.
You're unlocking something for me. I feel like you just tapped into a deep trauma. But now I feel like they tell you when you have a trauma, you should just sit in the grief for a minute and let it happen.
You're having feelings. It's okay. Feelings are good.
Yeah, I'm having all my feelings.
Whew.
But this is about how they are. This trauma is around the fight that's basically happened among people of color, and particularly African Americans, about how to engage the United States. That the United States is an enterprise that is flawed because it was rooted in slavery, and it was rooted in this exploitation of Native Americans, Mexican Americans, African Americans, women. It was rooted in all this exploitation. So when you say, but you also have these documents, right, that say like this higher calling, and we have a higher purpose, and we've amended those documents to include people. And now we've done all this work, particularly since the 1950s and 60s, to create a society that has more economic inclusion and more people and more, leaders, and a Black president happened, and we had a Black woman vice president, and like all these things that show America is progressing. And then Trump comes and he basically gives the argument back to the people who said, see, I told you, you can't trust it.
No.
You can't trust it. This is just in the soup, and you can't get away from it. And so this battle that I think we're all having between, we talk about the better angels of our nature on one shoulder, but that means that there are worse angels of our nature on the other shoulder. And right now, it just feels like the worst angels are winning. And I think it's driving everybody nuts.
Yes. And the first time around with Trump won, it was like, okay, well, maybe America's got itself back on track. Maybe we've, that was a blip. It's not a blip. And that's the countries and activists and communities and people are like, oh, that wasn't a blip. So therefore, this time around, we have to operate differently.
The bad guys
and that's
are back.
Some of what we're seeing where you started with, what does it mean to have community support for your business? Okay, I can't rely on the big system, national system company to help promote me the same way it promotes somebody else's stuff or somebody else. You gotta get into your own spaces and do it amongst yourselves. And it's just this idea that we're getting more and more siloed, right? And that's by intentionally, like they're intentionally separating us from global economy, trying to separate us from these resources that we've always had as shared resources and ideas, and say, nope, everybody just go back into your own box and just sit and be happy in your own box.
They want to go back to the world. They want to go back to the world that existed prior to, they said it out loud. They want to go back to the, 1870s to 1915 period, 1910 period of American economy and the way America was run, which the only way, it was obviously Jim Crow segregation. Women were relegated to the home. It was the only political power women had happened in the house. And we had, Black people were part of it. And, we had it was tariff economy, not a economy built on, with progressive income tax, which means that everybody who was buying things, right, excise taxes and tariffs, meant that people who bought things were the ones who paid the most taxes. Who buys the most things? People who have the least amount of money, because all their money comes in and then all their money goes out. If
paycheck
you're rich,
to paycheck.
You're not spending all your money. Right. So it's a regressive tax to have a tariff economy. And these people want to take it all back to that world.
And what else was in that world? Well, you had immigrants who were invited to work in for very short periods of time, and they were separated from society. They were not included in society. And when you needed more longer term labor and people who were integrated in society, you had children, child labor. Right. There are states like, Governor Sarah Huckabee, her state of Arkansas, where they've reduced the age to 14 and saying that you can now work without water breaks. They don't have to give you, Texas doesn't have to give people water breaks when they do manual labor. Right? This is their vision. This is their vision of a functioning world, which pretends like the Great Depression, stock market crashes, that none of that ever happened. And they're just setting up another cycle of that.
And the whole reason we had the big economic expansion, look, we had this huge expansion that happened from the 1940s until the 1980s, basically. It was like 50 years of economic expansion, 50 years of economic expansion. It happened in part because we had labor rights, and we had things like we got rid of child labor. We had the weekend off, we had minimum wages. We expanded the economy to include more people. And what happened when you broaden the base? More people at the base, the middle class got more things. When people in the middle class got more things, they bought houses, they bought cars, they spent more money. You know what? They spent more money. Companies made more money. Stock prices went up. Rich people did well. Like the cycle works. It was what they would call like a virtuous cycle, right? It all worked. And then what happened was we started restricting all the money that went to the base of the pyramid, and they started shifting it all back up to the top. And since then, we've gone back to this boom and bust kind of style economy with more people at the top making more money, and they lose places to have to invest it. So they're investing in riskier things, and you end up with pets.com, and everybody runs to that and it blows up. And maybe this is happening with some of the cryptocurrencies. I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but I think people are really worried that we're going into a kind of a economic period where people at the bottom have nothing, people at the top have everything, and the rest of us are just left to the whims of the most powerful people, both with the military they control and the intelligence services they control, the AI they control, and everyone else is just a serf.
Yep. And a serf or servants. This even the idea of domestic labor. Right, there's the front of the house where the people who are shown, and everybody else who does the work is in the back of the house. And that's it.
Right. That's it.
Well, this was not one of our most uplifting conversations.
Yeah.
But we do try to keep it real.
Who's trying to figure out whatever she needs that I just gave to her. I probably just approved a car loan or something just to get her out of here so we can finish recording.
Listen, to get my kid back in school after spring break, I just gave her Pop Rocks this morning. I'm like, yeah, sure, here's a pop. Why are they called Pop Rocks? And they kind of pop in your mouth. Here, let's go. Let's get to the car.
Right, have a few. Tell me what you think.
Oh,
Lord,
all right, Jamal. Till next time.
All right. Till next time. Bye, y'all.